From the end of carbon energy taxes to funding for senior centers, accountability and SNAP benefits to major improvements in the literacy programs for the state, this budget was a great example of how compromise can work in state government, of a budget that works for Pennsylvania. We're going to break it all down here today on the Struzzi Scoop podcast. So from the beginning of this budget, we understood that what the governor had proposed was not going to work. And that's why you came up with the Pennsylvania Prosperity Plan. So remind us a little bit about what that was and how that played into this final product.
Well, back in February when the governor proposed his $51.5 billion spending plan, we knew that was simply unrealistic given the amount of revenues that we expected to collect here in this 25-26 fiscal year. So we thought we need to have an alternative plan. As House Republicans, myself as the Minority Appropriations Chairman, we gathered our entire caucus together, had some meetings, did some surveys, working with our Appropriations Committee, and of course our staff in the Appropriations Office. We created the Pennsylvania Prosperity Plan, which was really a three-pronged approach to reducing the cost of government, making government more efficient, and raising our revenues. And those three overarching prongs were unleashing our energy industry, government reform and permitting, and a student-centered education for everyone across this Commonwealth. That approach really encompassed what we thought we needed to do to help move Pennsylvania in the right direction. And through these negotiation processes of this entire budget, we were able to make sure that those three pillars of success for Pennsylvania were ingrained in the final budget agreement, which was signed into law last week by Governor Shapiro.
And these are things that are popular with the people of Pennsylvania, things that you hear about from folks all the time. Who can argue with we need to have a robust energy industry, we need to have an education system that focuses on students, and that we need government to be more efficient. So I think what's very interesting to me about this is kind of how you were able to weave these principles in and out of the budget. And nowhere is it more apparent than with the desolation of smog here, with Reggie, the end of Reggie, which really kind of was like a dragon that just could not be killed.
When the governor unilaterally introduced Reggie as really an increase in taxes on carbon emissions for Pennsylvania back in 2019, I was only in my freshman term, and I thought, why would anyone with a state like Pennsylvania that has so many abundant natural resources consider even the prospect of something like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative? Yet they did. And we've seen, not anecdotally, thousands of jobs leave Pennsylvania, billions of dollars in investment leave Pennsylvania, mainly going to Ohio and West Virginia and Texas, where they embrace the energy industry. So we know that all those funds, all those jobs, all those families, the base of our communities have gone to other states. So getting rid of Reggie, which we did as part of this budget, as part of our prosperity plan, is so monumental for Pennsylvania because we will bring the energy industry back. We will bring those families, those jobs, and those revenues back to Pennsylvania. We know that coming into this budget, we had some obligations that we had to meet, specifically for Medicaid and other really cost-to-carry increases. So if you don't have the revenues, you can't spend the money. So by unleashing our energy industry, by getting rid of Reggie, we believe that our energy industry will come back in full, that we'll see baseload production resume here in Pennsylvania, and that coupled with the reforms that we were able to put into place related to expediting DEP permits, we really feel will turn the economy for Pennsylvania in a positive direction.
So if I'm someone who lives in southeastern Pennsylvania, right, Reggie isn't something that I think I'm as aware of because really, power plants, carbon power plants, natural gas, coal aren't something that I see very often.
Right.
But there really is a downstream effect of all this, right? If you're not making electricity in Indiana County, folks in Delaware County and Philadelphia and Montgomery County, their energy costs are going to go up, right?
And they already have. I think that's something that people don't realize, that since the looming threat of Reggie back in 2019, energy costs have increased dramatically. And that's not just on the consumer, that's on manufacturers, on industry, on your school districts, on your hospitals. When energy costs increase, everything increases. And that's what we've seen over the past 6 years. So by getting rid of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, we can resume that baseload production that is much needed. It's a simple supply and demand equation. We don't have enough supply of energy to meet the demands that are out there. That causes the cost to increase. That's what we've seen in Pennsylvania. And let's be honest, Pennsylvania powers the grid. we are the base load producer, and if we're not producing that energy, it's not coming from anywhere. And then everyone's energy costs have increased and will continue to increase. So now that we've turned that tide, now that RGGI is a thing of the past, we can see that base load energy production come back to Pennsylvania. Again, those jobs, those families, all those benefits to our local communities, and more importantly, the energy that we need to power our nation will come back to Pennsylvania, and it'll reduce the costs for working families across this Commonwealth.
And of course, RGGI is part of that conversation when it comes to increasing our energy production and keeping costs low. But you also mentioned that RGGI has driven jobs to Ohio and West Virginia and Texas. What was also interesting is Ohio, West Virginia, Texas, they're much better at permitting than we are.
Right.
But this budget really takes a big swing at making the permitting process better in Pennsylvania. So let's talk a little bit about permitting and how this budget made some major strides to make Pennsylvania more business friendly.
Yeah, essentially, it puts more permits into the speed process, which is the process that the DEP has undertaken, and I do give them credit for that. It also creates a deemed approval process for air and water quality permits. That's something that really deters business from coming to Pennsylvania. We've basically held up a closed, not open for business sign around our borders, specifically in western Pennsylvania, because these businesses, and let's face it, energy production, data centers, AI, those are global industries, and it is a fast market. They need the approvals quickly or they're going to go somewhere else. So I think this is a major step forward in creating this faster approval process to show people that, hey, Pennsylvania is open for business. We want you to come here, and we will welcome your basic investment in Pennsylvania.
The other thing I found so interesting is the permit tracker. So each agency now is going to be required to have a portal where you can go in and see where your permit is in the process. I mean, that's kind of a user-friendly thing that, as a former chamber president, you're thinking to yourself, geez, why didn't I have this?
Well, and you think about what is business, right? It's a business plan. It's milestones. If you know where your permit is in the process, then you can plan ahead. You don't want to have all your construction equipment lined up and not know where your permit is. So now everything can be sort of coordinated, and we can see, again, more business, more investment in Pennsylvania at a faster pace.
Huge wins, not just for the energy industry, but for economic development in general. So a lot of really great things happening here in Pennsylvania. And I think it's important to note that these were not at all a part of the governor's plan.
That's correct.
These were things that were brought to the table by legislative Republicans.
Absolutely. Our plan for prosperity, our Pennsylvania Prosperity Plan, was the key catalyst in the negotiations. Our pillars of success were key drivers in getting these policy wins for Pennsylvania. Our House Minority Caucus stood up and stood strong and stood united with our Senate Republican colleagues to make sure that we got these wins for Pennsylvania. Yes, many of us were concerned with the spend number, which is still slightly above $50 billion. But the good news is we did not touch our rainy day fund. We're able to use some of the surplus, prior year funds, some special funds to meet that spend number. But again, it's a compromise. We understood that in the minority, you don't have a lot of leverage. So we're able to use our prosperity plan, that and the relationships that we strengthened and built with our Senate colleagues to make sure that we had these wins for Pennsylvania. And these are huge wins. Mm-hmm. These are policy wins that have been years in coming. And I hope Pennsylvania residents realize that this budget, with the policy wins that we were able to get into the budget, the final budget that was passed last week, really set the stage for Pennsylvania to be successful in the future so that we can lower taxes, we can bring jobs back, we can make sure that working families in Pennsylvania have what they need to be successful and thrive. We do have a workforce for our young people. We do have career paths for our students, and they will get that student-centered education and a career in tech ed. Everything is going to prosper because of the policy wins that we were able to get into this budget.
So let's shift gears a little bit and move to that other pillar that we talked about, which is efficient government.
Right.
And so one of the things that we know is coming because of federal changes is going to be that if SNAP error rates are above 6%, we're going to be on the hook for paying for chunks of that money. And that's a major hole in the budget if we don't plug it here soon, because our error rate is around 10%.
Right.
So we have to really significantly lower that. And this budget makes some major changes to SNAP accountability to make sure that folks that are receiving those benefits are eligible for those benefits. So you want to talk a little bit about what those are?
Well, absolutely. And I think the key thing here is that we want to make sure that people who need and deserve the SNAP benefits and the other programs that are out there to help people get through difficult times get what they need. The problem that we face is people who probably shouldn't be getting those benefits are getting those benefits. And that means that people who should get them can't, because we really haven't looked at these roles. We haven't looked at eligibility requirements. We haven't looked at these fundamental things that you should have to check those boxes before you're eligible for SNAP benefits and other programs that help people. And so this is another step forward, and again, making government more efficient and saving taxpayer dollars, because we're spending millions of dollars on people who could be out working, who shouldn't be on benefits. This will help clean that up and make sure that families out there who do need these benefits, young children who need to have food on their table, who their parents can't pay their bills, we want to make sure that those are the people that are getting the benefits, not the people who don't deserve them.
And these are not harsh, controversial things. We're talking about checking the SNAP rolls against the rolls of death certificates from the
Right,
Department
right.
of Health. We're talking about looking at lottery winners.
Right.
We're talking about looking at the labor and industry rolls, folks that have lost a job that are now no longer in that position, that have been able to find employment, that they're not still getting these SNAP benefits. We're talking about reaching out to people who have high balances above $2,000 on their EBT cards to
Right.
make sure, hey, is everything okay? Are you spending this money? Do you need this money? Has there been a change in eligibility, and that's why you're not spending it? So it's not like this is some type of harsh reform coming in trying to axe people off of SNAP. These are really common sense reforms.
It's absolutely not that. It is what should have been occurring all along. Back when COVID came through, and we saw a lot of people continue to get benefits because there was no one being taken off the rolls. The times have changed, and it's time to take a fresh look at those roles. Again, as you said, it's not like we want to cut anything from people who deserve it. It's just making sure that the right people are getting the benefits that truly need those benefits. And I think something that a lot of people don't realize is that Pennsylvania, for several years, has requested a waiver from the federal government to waive the employment requirement for some benefits. If you are able to work and you can provide for your family without needing government assistance, then you shouldn't be getting it.
Right.
But the people who can't do that should be getting it. And if you're able to provide, if you're physically able to get out and get a job and you're working and you're making ends meet, then I think that you should step aside and let the people who do deserve it, who can't do that, get those benefits.
Another great protection that is in this as well, we know that SNAP fraud is oftentimes not a result of something that a recipient did wrong.
Right.
It's a credit card skimmer or someone that is,
True.
doing those scams that we see every day, right? That your constituents call, someone called and wanted my credit card number, all those types of
right.
things. So one of the things that's very interesting is there's a study on moving the EBT cards to a chip style system like most of us have on our credit
Right.
cards or our debit cards. And so that's really going to go a long way towards preserving benefits for people who deserve them as well.
I think that absolutely makes sense. We've heard many stories of people who expect to see those benefits in their account, and then when they go to use their card, it's not there.
Right.
It's been stolen. So I think that this speaks to integrity and making sure that, again, the people who deserve the benefits have those benefits, and they're not being basically ripped off by con artists and thieves.
And it's so wrong, and it's something that we should be addressing, because those folks, I'm sure those calls when you take them are heartbreaking, because it's probably an
Absolutely.
elderly person and it could have happened to really anyone. But unfortunately, it happens to SNAP cards, and this is going to go a long way towards setting us on a path to making those cards stronger. Let's switch a little bit further here. You talked about lowering taxes
Right,
a little bit earlier, and this budget actually does that for many people, especially in Indiana County.
Yes.
So, how does this budget help lower income wage earners?
Well, I think the benefits that we're going to provide people who, what we call working families who are just barely making ends meet. This tax credit through the ALICE program is really going to help a lot of people put food on their table, keep more money in their pockets, pay their bills. This tax credit, roughly I think it's around $800 per family, is really going to make a difference for people. It's something that I supported, and I was really, really happy to see this in the budget. So you couple that with the reduction in energy costs, the reduction in overall cost through the policy changes that we've made, and then you give working families a tax credit. I think it's really going to make a difference, particularly in some of our more rural communities.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because the governor talked about raising the minimum wage in his budget.
Right.
And we know what happens when you raise the minimum wage. You lose jobs. Look no further than California and what's been happening there, and how, I think some of their fast food workers were making $20-something an hour.
Right.
And those businesses just closed down. They stopped. There's news story and news story after, talking with folks who have lost their job. They thought, oh, this is great, I'm going to get a raise. No, you're not. You're just going to end up losing your job,
Right.
because we can't afford to pay everyone that. But on the flip side, the Republicans looked at this and said, how do we help people who are on the lower end of the wage scale keep more of their paycheck?
Right.
Rather than, raising the minimum wage and running the risk of them losing their jobs. So this is not something at all that the governor came to the table with. This was something, again, that Republicans came to the table with and said, let's fix this the right way.
Well, absolutely, and I just want to make sure everybody understands what ALICE means, because I know I dropped that acronym, and it's not a person.
Sure.
It's asset limited, income constrained, employed, again, working families who are just making ends meet. But when you talk about raising the minimum wage, someone has to pay for that. You continue to hear this talk of raising the minimum wage. We're not paying for that. The businesses are paying for that. And when your business, your small business in particular, has to pay their employees, $15, $18, $20 an hour, that money has to come from somewhere. And it either means someone else is going to lose their job, or you're going to pay more for everything that you buy from that business. We don't want to see that happen. Look, we're lowering taxes, right? We're lowering the cost of energy. And now we're going to turn around, at least not from our standpoint, but from the governor's standpoint, or our colleagues across the aisle, I know that the minimum wage is going to come back up again. So we're simply going to force businesses to raise their cost or cause more people to lose their jobs. And if you do raise the minimum wage, what happens to people who are already making more than the minimum wage, which in most cases is already occurring? Their raise or their salaries and their hourly rates are going to increase as well. So while I agree that everyone needs to make a great living wage, first of all, it's already happening in Pennsylvania. Very few people make minimum wage, and if they do make minimum wage, chances are they're single young people who are just starting out in the workforce. I have 4 kids at home, and 3 of them are still teenagers. They had minimum wage jobs, and they still do in high school, but that motivates them to do better in life, and honestly, they're not making minimum wage. Even working in a fast food restaurant, they're not making minimum wage. But the minimum wage isn't meant to be a living wage. It's meant to be a starting point for you to be motivated to make something of yourself. Go to school, work your way up through the ranks. And if we just simply increase that minimum wage across the board by government edict, then the businesses are going to suffer, and ultimately consumers and families are going to suffer.
And that's why this program is so much better. We're taking a federal program that exists and we're applying it to the state so that working families can get a tax credit back from the state. Their tax burden goes down, the money in their pocket increases, and it's just better all around for everybody.
It just makes sense.
So switching gears a little bit further, we had kind of 3 pillars on this. So we've gone through energy, we've gone through some government efficiency, and now we're looking at education. So how does this budget deal with education? What are some of the changes that are happening now?
Well, I think there are some very fundamental changes within education, particularly related to literacy and making sure that the young students are prepared for school at a younger age. I think that is so fundamental when you're talking about being prepared to learn. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of young people have not had that opportunity because we have essentially lowered the standards that's required, basic reading and arithmetic and things like that. So within this budget are some criteria that have to be met by school districts to make sure that young children are ready to learn, that they're not falling behind at an early age. Because if you're not ready to learn coming into kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, you're going to fall behind. and that is simply not fair. So I'm really happy to see that we included some basic literacy and education criteria within this budget.
And this is a total revamp in a lot of ways. We're now requiring all schools, whether they be a traditional school, whether it's a charter school, a private school, every education system in Pennsylvania is going to be required to use evidence-based tools to make sure that students from K through 3 are learning to read.
Absolutely.
And if they're not learning to read, then their parents are going to be notified, and there's going to be an approach to an actual action plan to help this student learn how to read. And so often you hear about that kind of breakdown in communication between students and parents and teachers. And so this is really a way that is set in stone of how to try and break through that barrier.
And it's a win for everybody. I know that educational groups, teachers have come into our office and spoken with us about wanting to see this happen because they care about the children, as we all do. And we really want to make sure that our young people are prepared to be successful in life. So I think this fundamental requirement is really going to make a huge difference for the future of Pennsylvania and for our young people and their families.
And I think importantly as well, talking about how students and families, school choice was something that, you know, the governor was really trying to take a hatchet to when it comes to cyber charter schools. But again, the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans came up and said, no, we need to keep cyber charters as an option. We understand there are concerns, and you certainly put some reforms into this bill for cyber charter schools, but it's still going to be an option moving forward for students.
Well, absolutely, and I think, again, this budget was a compromise. There were some extreme measures put forth to really, essentially punish charter schools. But school choice is so very important around this state because not every student learns the same way, particularly in some of our urban areas where the school districts are not meeting the needs of those students. So I think that although there were some significant cuts to the charter school funds that school districts have to pay out every year, they could have been much worse. And because our House Minority Republican Caucus and our Senate Republican colleagues stood up for school choice, that didn't happen. Understanding, of course, that there are burdens on our school districts, and in my district specifically, our local school districts pay a lot for charter schools. So we have to strike a balance. And I think that's where we need to be. We're not there yet, but I think we need to strike a balance so that when school choice is needed for students, they have that option. But we also don't want to overburden our public school systems with extreme charter school costs.
And this is an example of government working through compromise because the Democrats and the governor, they pretty much wanted to get rid of that option altogether.
Yes.
And on the same side, you understand that your school districts are paying a lot to send these kids to cyber charter schools. So it's finding that kind of sweet spot. This budget does find that sweet spot, although it's never going to be perfect next year and the year after. And we're always going to be trying to find that balance of how do we fund schools in the best way and how do we make sure that there aren't too many losers and that everyone's a winner. But that does require a little bit of give and take.
Well, I think you really encapsulated the entire budget process that we've gone through since when the governor introduced his spending plan back in February and then when earnest discussions start in June. This budget is truly a compromise. No one gets everything they want. But in the end, because we were willing to work with our colleagues across the aisle and across chambers, we're able to put into place some significant policy changes that will help Pennsylvania. We know that the governor continues to request increased spending beyond what we have available, and that's going to be a concern. Here we are just a few months away from his upcoming budget address for the 26-27 fiscal year. That's going to be coming up this February, and I hope that the administration has learned through this process that when you set a spending number that is much too high and it's unrealistic, you have to come in with an approach that's based more on fact than simply a wish list. And I really hope that message becomes clear because the budget process, yes, it took a long time and there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of different bills put forth with this number or that number. But in the end, when we all sat down, when the Republican leaders, Democratic leaders from both chambers and the administration sat down and said, what can we do together for Pennsylvania to make it better? I think that's what you saw happen with this budget. I understand, again, the spend number above 50 was a concern for many of our members. but we didn't touch the rainy day fund, and we put forth a plan with Republican policy principles embedded in it, really the core of it, to move Pennsylvania in the right direction.
I think that's so important because the governor's spending plan was going to require using the rainy day fund.
Right.
What you have been able to negotiate does not use the rainy day fund, keeps that fund entirely intact, not only intact, but because of the funds that are in there right now, it is going to continue to grow through interest earned. So
Right.
that we're at about $7.5 billion there now, and that number could grow.
It absolutely can and will and should. We again, the principles that were embedded in this budget, the policy wins, are economic drivers. So we hope that we see revenues increase for Pennsylvania. It's not going to happen overnight. It's been 6 years since Reggie was the threat that it has been on our energy industry, our manufacturers, our business sector overall. So you can't erase what's happened for 6 years. You can't erase the billions of dollars in investment that went to other states overnight. So it's going to take some time, but we will see those trends change, and we will see our economy grow. Does that mean we should continue to spend at historic numbers? No, it doesn't. We need to couple that with government reforms, but it also means we can make life better for Pennsylvanians, for families across this Commonwealth, and give our young people just incredible opportunities here.
One of the other aspects of this budget that is very interesting is it takes a lot of money that was from prior fiscal years and uses it to help spending in these current years.
Right.
So in years prior, agencies would be sitting on billions and billions of dollars
Right.
that they hadn't spent, and they would kind of roll that money into other projects and use that for funding various things, not all of it nefarious, of course, but
Right.
funding projects or funding changes or whatever else that agency wanted to invest in. This budget brings a lot of accountability to that in ways that it hadn't before. So talk a little bit about that, how much of an impact that has in budgeting and how good of a Republican idea that is.
Well, I think it makes absolute sense that if these agencies are getting billions of dollars in taxpayer funds and not using them, there needs to be accountability. If you're not needing the funds, first of all, why are you asking for them? And if you don't need them, then you should be returning them back to the general fund so that they can be better utilized to help Pennsylvania taxpayers. And I think that's something that you saw happen within this budget. But that's something that should be, I think, a fundamental responsibility of all these agencies, and really something that, as we go into next year's budget and we work through the budget hearings, that those questions need to be asked.
Sure, and as someone that came from a business background, that's not something you can do in business. You can't just sit on funds for years and years and years and not spend them or not invest them. You've got to do something, right?
It doesn't make good business sense.
Right. So it's bringing a little bit of that business acumen to the Pennsylvania budget in a way that it hasn't before. So Senator Pittman said it was about $3 billion through using lapse funds and also within the individual line items of requiring these agencies to use some of the funding that they've been sitting on. And just kind of a big win, not something that maybe grabs the headlines, but bringing some sanity to the budgeting process. Again, not at all something the governor proposed.
What you saw us pass last week in Senate Bill 160 was not even close to what the governor proposed. I think that what you saw passed last week was really a compromised budget between House and Senate Republicans and Democrats working together, through negotiations to craft a budget. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about today, a lot of the stuff that made headlines was not even part of the governor's original budget proposal. And so I think you saw more people with a realistic approach, speaking maybe from their district level or from their own experience or what they see in different parts of this state, craft a budget that fundamentally and realistically meets the needs of Pennsylvania. Not some, pie in the sky sort of promises that didn't make sense, but a more realistic approach to truly meeting the needs of Pennsylvania residents, our businesses, and our communities, and really setting the stage for Pennsylvania's future.
One last group we did not talk about so far today is counties. And there's a lot of good stuff in here to help our local government and our counties. What were some of those wins that our counties can point to?
Well, I think the mental health funding is going to be great for our counties. Simply getting the funds flowing will help our counties. I think that across the board, some of the increases that we saw to help with, direct care workers. Again, you mentioned senior centers, getting some funds flowing back to senior centers. A lot of wins for our counties. We're going to continue to break those down as we move forward. The continuation of the 911 funding, I think, is a good step in the right
That's
direction.
critical, right? Because that was going to
Yes.
expire. So,
Right, yes.
yeah.
I know the counties wanted an increase, but to simply continue the funding, I think, is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the 911 centers are funded through a 911 fee, which is
Right.
on everyone's cell phone bill or to the extent people have landlines. And so that fund was set to expire at the end of January 2026. And so had we not extended that here, they would be looking at a funding crisis. This staves off that funding crisis for at least another 4 years.
And I think it gets back to the fundamental purpose of government is to keep our community safe and to make sure that when you pick up the phone to call for an ambulance or a fire truck or a police car, that they are able to respond. And so making sure we have the right funding in place for our emergency services, I think, is essential and something that we should all be working more towards in the future.
We also know that during the budget impasse, the treasurer had offered some loans to agencies to cover certain costs. The fiscal code this year, part of the budget, does indeed allow the Treasury to write off the interest on those loans. That's another big win as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
So it helps those counties save some money.
Yeah, and I commend the treasurer for putting forth those loans to try and help our counties get through the budget impasse. I know that was difficult. It was difficult for a lot of agencies, for a lot of school districts, for nonprofits, for people in general. That this impasse went much longer than it should have. But again, you have to make sure that we're doing the right thing for Pennsylvania, and any budget that we pass isn't simply a budget for that year. It's a budget that sets the stage for the future. And so by sticking to our guns on a number of these issues, keeping our Pennsylvania prosperity plan at the forefront of our negotiations, really I think is a win for Pennsylvania because we got principles and policies in place that will help us in the future.
So in the end here, I think that the biggest lesson I'm gleaning from what you're saying is that the governor needs to have a realistic plan if he expects it to pass on time. But when you come out with a plan that is so out of whack with reality, it's going to take many, many more months to get together a compromise and get something done on time. But if the governor comes forward next year with a realistic proposal, perhaps he can get his first on-time budget.
And I certainly hope that the governor will see that. He has not over the past 3 years, and this being his fourth budget coming up here in February, his spending proposal. Any fundamental budgeting process looks at your revenues and you set your expenditures around what you expect your revenues to be. You don't say, well, I have this much money in my savings account, I'll just use all of that to go out and buy a race car when all I need is a small SUV to carry my family around. You don't spend more than you have, but unfortunately, the administration has proven year after year that our savings account, our rainy day fund, our surplus are theirs to spend, and it should not be that way. Any business, really any household, will tell you at the beginning of the month, you look at what you expect your revenues to be, where you have your expenditures, and you balance that out. You don't spend more than you have. If you don't have the money to go out again and buy a sports car, you don't do that using your savings account. You have to plan for the future, and if you continue to use your reserves, you're not going to have enough money to make ends meet, and ultimately someone has to pay for that, and that's the taxpayers. And that is what we, as House Republicans, as Senate Republicans, our colleagues across the building, do not want to see happen. That is why we continue to push for responsible budgeting, responsible spending, and responsible government.